Hello everyone, I'm here in Kista in Stockholm, and I thought this was a perfect place to do a story on Huawei because this is known as the Silicon Valley of Europe.
Huawei is something that's very dangerous.
Huawei is a $100 billion company. They have operations in 170 countries.
It's one of the world's leading companies in telecommunications, provides telecom equipment, network equipment, has moved into the smartphone industry and has taken a position in the top 3.
So what are the reasons for Huawei's success? Well, that depends on who you ask.
First of all, we spent time at work when others were spending time having coffee. In general, we worked harder than others.
What is important to note about the exponential growth of market share gains realized by both ZTE and Huawei is that they were not tied to any unique technology development.
One thing you hear frequently is that Huawei is able to offer pricing much lower than its competitors.
I was talking to an executive from a European telco that was involved in a bidding process with Huawei, and he said that they offered them close to a 90% discount.
We have frequently seen bids that do not seem to make sense in the pricing. We think that nobody could, if there were a company that was beholden to shareholders and had to make profits, could offer that sort of bid. The industry, electronics are pretty well known. If you look at a product, everyone can sort of guess how much it's going to cost in raw materials, etc.
There are 3 aspects to the support that Huawei receives. The first is the domestic market share, the second is the subsidies, and the third is the lines of credit and loans to Huawei's customers. Let's look at market share. Huawei is said to have protected market share within China.
And the Chinese government has closed China to non-Chinese optical vendors. In most countries, telecom service providers are independent entities that make their own decisions regarding procurement. In China, however, the big 3, China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom, are all state-owned enterprises. There are numerous reports indicating that procurement by the Chinese telecom operators has been a major factor fueling the success of Huawei and ZTE and their ability to finance their research and development and to penetrate foreign markets.
The Chinese government guarantees Huawei and ZTE 2/3 of domestic 5G network contracts. Foreign firms have to compete with other Chinese firms for the remaining 1/3. Then there's the evidence from the operators themselves. Both China Telecom and China Unicom have disclosed that the state-owned parent company makes procurement decisions. China Unicom said in a financial statement, "Our operations depend on a number of services provided by Unicom Group. For example, Unicom Group provides equipment procurement services to us."
So effectively, you have a closed market where you can make your profits do well, excluding most non-Chinese companies.
And it's calculated that the Chinese government has financed the growth of Huawei with some $75 billion over the last few years to enable it to achieve the kind of market dominance.
Huawei has received $1.6 billion in grants from 2009 to 2018.
Third, the Chinese optical vendors are provided with significant export credits. China is the leading provider of export credits, and Huawei and ZTE have been major beneficiaries of this generous export support. Huawei describes the credit line as an export buyer's credit that is financing available to Huawei for overseas customers to finance the purchase of equipment from Huawei. The terms are not public, but are reported to be extremely favorable. Finally, state-owned China banks have also supported ZTE and Huawei by conditioning loan packages to foreign telecom operators on the procurement of Chinese equipment.
What they do have is a $100 billion credit line from the Chinese Development Bank, which means that apart from any other questionable business practices that Huawei have, and we've been told of quite a few, they can undercut by 30 to 50% any other vendor.
It's not just the US. The EU started an investigation in 2010 after receiving a complaint that Huawei and ZTE were receiving subsidies for wireless modems. An initial investigation found that the subsidies may be as high as 100%. In 2014, the EU decided not to pursue the anti-dumping investigation. This was to allow continued negotiations with Chinese authorities. Huawei says that it does not receive special funding from Beijing, and the support it receives is no different to those received by its major competitors, and it receives no special treatment from the government or state-run banks. I want to move on to intellectual property.
Huge spending on research means Huawei claim they're now around 18 months ahead of any other 5G manufacturer.
Others have a different view.
I've heard some of our NATO allies, heads of state, essentially say Huawei is both higher quality and lower cost than anything else they can buy right now. Is that true?
It's just not true. Our 5G rollouts in our telcos are going to lead the world, and they're using only those other vendors. They're Samsung, Nokia, and Ericsson in the rollout.
The notion that some companies are better than others, I'm not sure I agree with that, and the companies, the telcos that we spoke to across the globe, including here in Australia, may not all agree with that.
Another factor in Huawei's favour is the Chinese government's interference in the standard-setting process at international bodies. For example, the Chinese government requires Chinese firms to vote as a bloc for Chinese nationals seeking leadership positions in these organisations, or for proposals that favour adoption of Chinese standards, regardless of technical merit. In one of the organizations that sets 5G standards, Chinese firms all changed their votes to favor a proposal by Huawei after initial results showed that many firms favored a compromise solution combining Huawei's proposal with a different standard favored by US chip designer Qualcomm. Huawei has faced repeated accusations of intellectual property theft. Huawei says it does not need to steal anyone else's intellectual property, and no court has found that it engaged in malicious theft of intellectual property. Court documents that I obtained through PACER tell a very different story of Huawei's approach to intellectual property. I should note that for the sake of time, I'm only focusing on a few cases. And on that point of malicious theft, at least according to jury instructions that I have read, maliciousness is only a factor that comes up when deciding to award punitive damages. In 2003, Cisco sued Huawei. According to Cisco's complaint, Huawei had engaged in systematic and wholesale infringement of Cisco's intellectual property in order to develop a cheaper router, which Huawei did by copying Cisco's technology, command line interface, and Cisco's user manuals. Cisco said that the copying was so extensive that an IT manager trained in the use of Cisco routers could use the Huawei products in question without training. Huawei admitted that the products contained Cisco code, but that this was less than 2% of the code. In July of 2004, Cisco and Huawei reached a settlement and ended the litigation. Motorola sued Huawei in 2010. According to the complaint, a Motorola employee emailed Jinglong Hu and Ren Jiafei with specifications for the SC300 base station, which were marked Motorola proprietary. The email contained the words, attached, please find those documents about SC300 CDMA 2001X specification you asked. Mr. Hu acknowledged receipt of this email. In its response, Huawei admits that it received the email containing the specification and the words quoted. Huawei admits that Mr. Hu acknowledged receipt of the email and that the specification was also labeled Motorola proprietary. However, Huawei denied having requested the email nor the specification. They also denied knowing that the specification was proprietary. In April of 2011, Motorola and Huawei announced that they had reached an agreement to settle all pending litigation against each other. In 2017, a Seattle jury awarded T-Mobile $4.8 million after finding that Huawei had misappropriated trade secrets relating to Tappy, a robot T-Mobile had developed to test phones. However, the jury found that this was not willful and malicious. Huawei was found to have breached 3 separate agreements with T-Mobile. The US Department of Justice filed criminal charges over the incident. One of the prosecutors said that their evidence includes numerous emails.
During the time period of the alleged crimes, Huawei announced a bonus program for its employees worldwide, that it would pay cash to employees for stealing confidential information from competitors. And yet, and very tellingly, within days of this offer, Huawei USA sent an email to its employees acknowledging this conduct would be illegal in the United States.
According to the docket, the jury trial is set for October 2022. A Texas jury found that Huawei had willfully infringed upon patents from Panoptis. The patents Huawei had infringed were software techniques used to receive and display video on smartphones. The jury awarded compensatory damages of $10.6 million and enhanced damages of $2.6 million.
In the past, you faced legal challenges from Cisco, from Motorola, from T-Mobile. What does that say about the culture at the company, and what steps have you taken to address some of the issues that came up as a result of those legal cases?
First of all, I think all these cases have been heard in court. We should respect the court's judgments. We require all of our employees not to do anything wrong in this regard.
Now let's look at Huawei's ownership and its ties to the Chinese state and the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP for short.
Huawei has been repeatedly accused of being owned or funded by the Chinese government. Here are the facts. Huawei is employee-owned. 96,000 current and former staff own 100% of the company.
Others have a different view.
After all, Huawei is effectively a state-owned corporation in the People's Republic of China under the Communist Party. Huawei Technologies is 99% owned by Huawei Investment Holdings. Huawei Investment Holdings is completely owned by the Huawei Investment Holdings Trade Union Committee. And according to Chinese law, trade union committees are classified as public or mass organizations. And public organizations do not have shareholders, as they are recognized under Chinese law as legal persons or entities in their own right. An example of a public organization would be the Communist Youth League.
The relationship between Huawei and the state is the same as the Communist Youth League to the state. And therefore, is it not baffling that the government continues to argue that Huawei is a private company when in no meaningful sense by the Western definition can that be said?
Huawei says that the Trade Union Committee mainly organizes leisure activities for employees, such as badminton and photography.
Earlier this year, I was given a database of about millions of CVs, and out of that we were able to extract about 30 million CVs, or 30,000 individual CVs from Huawei. So what I was able to do is I was actually able to look inside what was going on with Huawei employees. What did they say they were doing? I'm no longer relying on governmental reports about what they say Huawei is doing. I'm no longer relying on a news article. I'm actually looking at what Huawei employees tell me that they are doing. What I found surprised, I think, even me. We found employees that worked at the same time they were working for Huawei. We found employees that were working for the People's Liberation Army Cyber Warfare Division. That doesn't sound like an employee of a purely profit-driven enterprise. We found employees that were stating that they were a representative of the Ministry of State Security, which is the primary intelligence gathering arm of the Chinese state. We found employees that I could tie back to known cases of IP theft and data interception around the world.
Huawei has said that Ren Zhaofei, like many business leaders in the US and elsewhere, have been in the military. There is, however, one key difference. The People's Liberation Army is the armed wing of the Communist Party, not a national army. There is also the independence of Huawei subsidiaries. The US House of Representatives Select Committee on Intelligence in 2012 said, several current and former employees of Huawei USA describe a company that is managed almost completely by the Huawei parent company in China. In the Taipei case, T-Mobile said, Huawei China R&D directed both its own employees and Huawei USA employees to steal this information from T-Mobile. A UK Huawei executive had difficulty demonstrating his independence.
Are employees and directors of Huawei in the UK free to express their views?
Yes, very much so. And we are free to express our views, yes.
So what's your view of the new security law in Hong Kong?
Okay, I'm a telecoms executive. I've worked in telecoms all my life.
Huawei has also faced accusations of bribery, violating sanctions, and being complicit in human rights abuses. In 2019, John Suffolk, Huawei's global cybersecurity and privacy officer, gave a very revealing answer.
Our starting point in 170 countries in which we operate in is what is the law? What does the law define as what is acceptable and unacceptable? And I think it's right for governments to determine, in essence, their objectives and enshrine that in law.
Mr. Suffolk also had a memorable exchange with MP Dr. Lewis.
Do you have a view as to whether or not that Chinese one-party state is repressive of human rights?
I don't have a view on that, no.
You don't have a personal view on that?
I don't have a personal view on that.
You're a moral vacuum?
I don't believe so, no.
Michael McCarthy spoke of an incident in Algeria involving Huawei.
Both Huawei and ZTE have been found guilty of money laundering and paying bribes to obtain business with Algeria Telecom. As a result of these activities, alleged to have occurred over a 3-year period. 3 Chinese company officials were sentenced in absentia to 10 years in jail, and Huawei and ZTE were banned from participating in public contracts in Algeria.
A 2020 USCC report said that in Zambia, Huawei helped the government intercept the communications of bloggers running an opposition website, and said that in Uganda, Huawei helped the government intercept the communications of Bobi Wine, an opposition MP. Then there's the plight of the Uyghurs.
Today, most of them, about 11 million, live in the Chinese province Xinjiang.
And in recent years, China has started interning them. The UN estimates that the government is holding some 1 million Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities.
Beyond these camps, the Chinese government has built a modern police state to surveil the Uyghurs.
The world's most sophisticated surveillance technology is being implemented here with meticulous diligence. Among the hundreds of flashing lights suspended from the ceiling are rows of surveillance cameras, literally every 2 meters. I counted at least 40 just in a small room, watching over every conversation.
What products and services do you have, do you provide for local government in Xinjiang province? Well, that's not actually one of our projects that's done via a third party. Our contracts are with the third parties. It's not something we do directly.
Huawei is intimately intertwined with Chinese policy towards the Uyghur. According to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Huawei works directly with the Chinese government Public Security Bureau in Xinjiang on a range of projects. We know that Huawei is collaborating with the Chinese government to build mass surveillance to target the Uyghur people.
Professor Adrian Zenz, a German scholar who recently gave evidence to the independent Uyghur tribunal, said this: Huawei is directly implicated in Beijing's police state and related human rights violations in Xinjiang. It's lied to the public about this. In 2014, Huawei received an award from Xinjiang's Ministry of Public Security for its role in establishing city-wide surveillance systems.
The patent that was filed in July of 2018 was submitted by Huawei and the China Academy of Sciences. It describes a face recognition product that's capable of identifying people on the basis of their ethnicity and specifically if they're part of the Uyghur minority. What that shows is that Huawei worked directly with the Chinese government.
Should we do business with a company that's complicit in human rights abuses? I think you should do business with all companies that stick to the law.
Huawei is also seen as a national security threat. They continue to deal with Iran extensively without full public knowledge of how. They build the mobile network for Korea, North Korea, not South Korea.
In September 2021, Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou entered into a deferred prosecution agreement with US prosecutors. Officials said Meng's admissions confirm the crux of the government's allegations in the prosecution of this financial fraud, that Meng and her fellow Huawei employees engaged in a concerted effort to deceive global financial institutions, the US government, and the public about Huawei's activities in Iran. Now we turn to the topic that most frequently comes up when discussing Huawei: cybersecurity concerns. Most people think of spying as being the biggest risk, but it's actually the disruption or the shutdown of the network. Telecommunications infrastructure is the central nervous system for modern societies. Without it, you cannot bank, you cannot buy groceries, and you can't call the emergency services. Nation-states pose the greatest risk to telecoms networks. The combination of motivation, intent, and high-level capability enables states to perpetuate attacks that can be very complex and have a major impact on essential services for the general public. The FCC said that Huawei poses a particular security risk because Chinese intelligence agencies have opportunities to tamper with Huawei's products in both the design and manufacturing processes.
If you're going to hack into this iPhone, the best people to ask be the people that designed it. And that's exactly what the Chinese government has access to.
There is a claim Huawei frequently makes that I would like to address.
So we do not run networks. We provide equipment to telecommunications operators. So they run the network.
We actually don't run networks.
We don't run the network. The same in China and in the UK.
This is absolute nonsense because, as the University of Strathclyde said in written evidence to the UK Parliament, there has been a significant drive to outsource key components of mobile networks.
In many parts of the world, Huawei actually operates the equipment on behalf of host nation telecommunications companies. A backdoor is not needed if you already have a key to the front door.
According to the University of Strathclyde's written evidence to the UK Parliament, this outsourcing creates the risk of a significant capability gap. In December 2018, O2's network was unavailable for a period of around 23 hours, affecting over 25 million customers. O2 did not have the capabilities in-house to resolve this issue independently, because they had significant reliance on Ericsson for their mobile network core. The FCC said the 2012 HPSCI report underscores that Chinese intelligence services need only recruit working-level technicians or managers to perform the bidding of the intelligence or military agencies without having to involve Huawei's leadership. The U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Intelligence said, "The task of finding and eliminating every significant vulnerability from a complex product is monumental. If we also consider flaws intentionally inserted by a determined and clever insider, the task becomes virtually impossible. While there is a large body of literature describing techniques for finding latent vulnerabilities in hardware and software systems, no such technique claims the ability to find all such vulnerabilities in a pre-existing system. Techniques do exist that can prove a system implementation matches a design which has been formally verified to be free of certain types of flaws. However, such formal techniques must be incorporated throughout the design and development process to be effective. They cannot be currently applied to a finished product of significant size or complexity." Mitigation has been tried in the real world. Back in 2010, Huawei established and funded an evaluation centre which is overseen by the UK government. Kieran Martin, then CEO of the National Cybersecurity Centre, gave his assessment to the UK Parliament's Defence Committee.
Huawei's general practice of security is objectively lower at present than their main competitor. We've set out the evidence for that. We said very clearly that that is evidence of poor engineering and security practice, and doesn't constitute direct evidence of deliberate insertion of so-called backdoors by the Chinese state. In fact, I think the sort of flaws we're talking about wouldn't normally be referred to as backdoors. They're basically weaknesses, vulnerabilities that can be exploited by a range of actors.
According to written evidence by the University of Strathclyde, HCSEC has highlighted much of Huawei's software lacks basic engineering competence and significantly increased risk to UK operators, and that some of their coding practices make the job of any code auditor exceptionally hard, and could be explained by developers actively working to hide bad coding practice rather than fix it. The 2020 Huawei Oversight Board report said the increasing number and severity of vulnerabilities discovered by the relatively small team at HCSEC is a particular concern. If an attacker has knowledge of these vulnerabilities and sufficient access to exploit them, they may be able to affect the operation of a UK network.
Huawei has not demonstrated in a 10-year period any improvement in their security engineering process. They're still doing the things they said they were going to fix 10 years ago. They've promised a transformation program, putting $2 billion against it. There's no plan. There has been no change yet. I think the premise that you can establish an oversight monitoring board, it's just not cost effective too. And what's it going to get you? Again, actions speak louder than words here, and we're just not seeing the follow through globally. Even if you fixed all those vulnerabilities, even if Huawei or whomever else fixed every single vulnerability or issue in this product, you would still have, as you mentioned earlier, the update cycle that is subject to the control of the government of China.
Are there other security issues? Yes, for sure there are. Finite State, a respected US company, I quote, "Huawei devices qualitatively pose a high risk to their users. In virtually all categories we studied, we found Huawei devices to be less secure."
Australia was the first country to ban Huawei from its 5G networks. Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister, explained the decision.
The decision we took was really one based on hedging against future risks. I mean, the reality is the nature of the 5G network is that you cannot any longer reasonably distinguish between the core and the radio access network.
So what is that? Well, fortunately, part of the edge is behind me here. This is a mobile base station, and this would form part of the radio access network, which is the edge. And this is what allows your mobile phone to access the mobile phone network. But the critical functions on the network are handled by the core. So that would be things like authorization and billing. It allows you to make calls and reach other subscribers on the network and other networks as well. And so this allowed a sort of logical and physical separation where we could allow high-risk vendors to provide base stations and other edge-type equipment on the network. But the problem with 5G is that that distinction starts to fall away. And so we start bringing more core functions closer to the edge of the network, closer to the base station, and ultimately closer to you. And that has many benefits. It allows us to reduce the latency, can give you higher speeds and so on. And so that creates a lot of challenges, and one of them being a risk in one part of the network is a risk in any part of the network.
We worked hard in ASD with other agencies to look at what yes would look like. In the end, I concluded that yes wasn't acceptable, but the decision was taken by government, and I think it's the right decision that has been made.
The UK initially decided to allow Huawei in its 5G network because geographical differences between Australia and the UK meant the core edge distinction still applied, to which Simeon Gilding said, "I struggle to understand what this means. It reminds me of the vague, faux authoritative language techies use to talk down to civilians with humanities degrees. Geography is not a factor in how core edge works. The reality is, mature 5G networks actually require the collapse of the core edge distinction." Geography was of no benefit to ZTE because the National Cybersecurity Centre said the risks could not be mitigated.
China has reacted angrily after the government banned Huawei from the UK's 5G networks amid security concerns. It's a major U-turn after the Prime Minister said in January that the firm could be allowed a limited role in the new era of faster technology.
So high-risk vendors for us are categorised as vendors that actually have headquarters in countries where those countries have capability, form and intent, and coercive laws that compel their companies to cooperate on matters of national intelligence.
Washington claims Chinese law will force Huawei to spy for the Chinese government. If you read the text of the law, it may sound bad. But many countries have laws.
Okay, let's just stop here for a second. The biggest difference between China and Western countries is this building behind me. This is the Swedish Parliament. Fundamental to the rule of law is the principle that a government can only act on powers legally conferred upon it. The Canadian Supreme Court said that the rule of law principle requires that all government action must comply with the law, including the Constitution. Germany's basic law confirms a related concept. It is so important that it cannot be amended. In contrast, the Chinese Communist Party's conception of the rule of law, or Fazi, is a bit different. The party is widely perceived to support rule by law, not rule of law. The party is particularly unwilling to submit itself to legal restraints, and it insists that judicial authorities cannot investigate party members without the party's consent. One of the conditions for becoming a judge is supporting the Chinese constitution, the leadership of the Communist Party, and the socialist system. The CCP, through People's Committees, also controls the appointment of judges. Consequently, Chinese courts cannot be expected to render judgments contrary to the interests of the government or the party. This is a position endorsed by the man himself. President Xi said, "We must never follow the path of Western constitutionalism, separation of powers, or judicial independence." The law can even come in the form of orders from officials. It is not the form of communication that creates its binding character, but the source and authority of the party giving the direction. In Sweden, as with most other democracies, the law and the legal system exist to constrain the power of the state. In other words, the Prime Minister, down to the lowest government official, can only do what the law empowers them to do. There is also an independent judiciary and other checks and balances that help ensure the government is constrained in its access of power. In China, the law and the legal system exist to enhance and expand the power of the Communist Party. In fact, the party is above the law. With that in mind, let us look at the 2017 National Intelligence Law. As an example, Article 7 says, "Any organization or citizen shall support, assist, and cooperate with the state intelligence work in accordance with the law and keep the secrets of the national intelligence work known to the public." The state protects individuals and organizations that support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence work. The Chinese National Intelligence Law is extremely broad, applying to Chinese citizens residing outside of China. Article 11 specifies that the law's powers are not limited to Chinese soil. Taken together, these laws empower the PRC government to make extensive affirmative demands on Chinese companies and their officers and employees to advance the CCP's intelligence gathering interests. The law leaves most terms undefined, allowing for the arbitrary interpretations that suit the interests of the CCP. Huawei, of course, has a different interpretation of these laws.
There are no laws in China that obligate us to work with the Chinese government on anything whatsoever. And we have looked at all of the Chinese laws. We have taken on board professors in Chinese law, and we've had their views validated via Clifford Chance in London.
Bob Seeley has a different view.
Sam, was that the Clifford Chance report? Was that the report that offered legal advice that then in the small print said that is in no way legally binding? So effectively, yeah. Clifford Chance was completely whitewashing Huawei.
So I would say that a document like that appeared to be nothing but PR because it wasn't really a piece of legal advice.
Huawei contends that the Chinese National Intelligence Law does not permit the Chinese government to compel companies such as Huawei to spy for it. But such a reading is clearly not required by the text, precisely where one might expect such a law to be specific to support a limited reading. Instead, it is vague. And even if Huawei interprets the law in a more narrow fashion, it cannot so bind the Chinese government.
And we absolutely never install backdoors. Even if we were required by Chinese law, we would firmly reject that.
The FCC said any resistance by Huawei to requests for assistance by Chinese intelligence services would likely be futile in light of the Chinese government's authoritarian nature. Indeed, the Chinese law expert on whom Huawei relies in attempting to rebut these allegations concedes that his opinion is provided solely from his own legal perspective and does not take into account political realities. Huawei has also said that it is willing to sign no spy agreements, which to me is laughable given that a court found they breached 3 separate agreements with T-Mobile. At this point, I think it's best to put aside Huawei for a moment and look at the Chinese Communist Party and its interests. In China, foreign and domestic policy is determined solely and exclusively by the interests of the Chinese Communist Party and its elite. The CCP has only one primary goal: the survival of the regime. The entire domestic and foreign policy of the PRC is subordinated to this one goal, which is achieved through 2 basic measures: eliminating any threats and gaining the support. This desire for survival can be seen in party documents. Chris Patton spoke about one such document.
First instructions that were given to the Chinese party officials and government officials in 2013 when Xi Jinping was coming to the leadership, which we can perhaps talk about later, was called, rather Orwellian phrase, Communique number 9. And it urged the party and the government to face up to an intense struggle, was the translation, against all the elements of liberal democracy. Western ideas of parliamentary democracy, the idea that human rights are universally valid, Western ideas of freedom of speech, Western ideas about the role of universities, historical nihilism, in other words, don't talk about Tiananmen. All those ideas which identify and really in an extraordinarily accurate way what we regard as a liberal democracy. So the first thing to say is that in relation to values, and people very often say that there isn't really a battle of values between us and China. Of course there's a fight over values between us and China. So Xi Jinping, or at least his acolytes, recognize that the UK is a society which is at least based on the elements of governance which he finds so deplorable and such an existential threat to China.
This is why the CCP brutally suppresses any advocacy of human rights or democracy, because it sees these ideas as a threat to the party's existence. The events in Hong Kong and Xinjiang are good examples of this.
The replacing of faith and cultural identity with a different loyalty. I love the Communist Party of China, this man has written.
It is why the party is developing technology, such as AI and facial recognition, to control the Chinese people.
The US-based group IPVM found a document outlining plans in one Chinese city to create comprehensive profiles of every citizen.
Something that's termed one person, one file. For each person, the government would store their personal information, their political activities, relationships, anything that might give you insight into how that person would behave and what kind of a threat they might pose.
They've also found patents from Huawei, which suggest it's developing technology to support a one-person, one-file system.
With the increasing popularity of smart cameras in the future, the number of face images captured in a city in a year will evolve to trillions. Therefore, how to archive this face image data and obtain one file per person has become an urgent problem to be solved.
The CCP is obsessed about the collapse of the Soviet Union. The party has written thousands of internal papers, held study sessions, and even produced a documentary about the Soviet Union's downfall in an effort to avoid a similar fate. The fate of the Soviet Union drives the CCP's fear that the West is trying to overthrow the party through a battle of ideas. In this defense white paper, officials said anti-China forces have never given up their attempt to instigate a color revolution in this country. Color revolutions refer to protests that took place in the former Soviet Union. This is a hostile communist state, one that routinely hacks into Western companies and organizations.
Wanted by the FBI, 5 Chinese military officials who've allegedly spent years stealing trade secrets from some of the biggest companies in the U.S.
For the first time, the U.S., joined by European allies and NATO partners, publicly condemned China for malicious cyber hacks and directly hiring hackers.
The CCP is also targeting telcos. The cybersecurity firm Cybersecurity uncovered a hack that they called SoftCell.
In this attack, they attacked more than 10 different telco in the world, mobile provider, that affected more than hundreds of millions of people in 5 different countries, in 5 different continents, on 30 different countries. We understood that we were talking about a very targeted attack. Basically, they were after 20 specific individuals that were a customer of these cellular providers. What the hackers took, and this was the surprising thing, was all the information about every call that those people have been doing. Not just every call, every text message that you were sending. And the most surprising thing was that they took every location that the cellular provider had on those people. We immediately realized that we're talking about Espionage Act. This is not a situation that some criminals grabbing some information. Basically, we realized that this is somebody that have a capability to hack to this type of organization. We analyze it and we manage to map all the tactics and techniques to a group called APT-10. APT-10 is part of the attack group that in China.
So what does this have to do with Huawei?
That fundamentally the private sector in China is an extension of the government. And so if our allies decide to trust Huawei, they're deciding to trust the Chinese government with their big data.
One point that I want to stress is that the Chinese people need our support because they are victims of this regime. The CCP and its supporters will try to link being anti-CCP with being anti-Chinese to shield itself from criticism. The Chinese Communist Party never has and never will speak for all the Chinese people. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it informative and I will see you next time. So bye-bye.